get to our first speaker here in Victoria, in the Victorian Queensland node for the afternoon. Our first speaker is John Grundy, and he will be talking about human-centric model-driven software engineering. Can a living lab approach help? John Grundy is an Australian laureate fellow and professor of software engineering at Monash University. Previously, he was senior deputy dean for the Faculty of IT at Monash, a pro-vice chancellor at Deakin, and dean and head of department at Swinburne University of Technology. He has published over 500 refereed papers in the areas of software tools, methods, visual modeling approaches, software architecture, automated software engineering, and user interfaces. He's a fellow of automated software engineering and fellow of Engineers Australia. Welcome, John, and we are looking forward to your talk. Let's share. Open this one up. Okay.
All good.
I believe so.
You can see that, everybody? Maybe not.
No, it's a yes from me.
Ah, okay, all right.
Just do the speaker's view.
It's all right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, folks. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk with you about living labs today. I just wanted to start with a very brief overview of my lab at Monash, and then I'll talk about our interest in the living labs approach, and finish with a few questions for you as kind of probably people with somewhat more expertise than us in the area. I wanted to show you this pretty picture because it took us ages to come up with it last year. So really the only particularly interesting thing for this audience is probably the top bit. So we're a research lab in the Faculty of IT at Monash. The big picture direction is creating software for the diverse human community, or better methods of creating software for the diverse human community is probably actually the focus point. So we're a multidisciplinary team, and what we're trying to do is leverage that collective backgrounds of the team to come up with better ways of developing software that take into account the kind of diversity that we have as humans, as individuals, as groups, teams, organizations, societies. Some of the teams online, so there's obviously me here. I think Jen, I saw Lisa, I think Humphrey's there, Ingo's there.
John, sorry to interrupt, but we can't see, we can just see your, can't see the slideshow, just the...
Someone's going to come and do something with it because it's showing here, but...
Sorry to interrupt.
It's just showing the front page.
Yeah, we can only see the front page. So you're probably moving the slides, but we can only see the one with the notes.
You may have to stop sharing and share again.
Yeah.
How's that looking?
Yeah.
That's it.
Perfect.
Well, the only problem is I'll go back to the previous one, which is much more.
Yeah, that didn't show.
If I can, hold on. It's
showing the notes view, not the full.
So are you getting the full screen or screen and notes?
It's
yeah, that's great.
That's all right. Doesn't matter.
okay.
They can see it. So sorry, I'll just reiterate that. So the idea of this lab is to come up with better ways to engineer software, and particularly interested in kind of bringing that diversity of people fully into the entire process, which unfortunately, as I'll mention in a moment, we're not too good at as software engineers. So as I say, there's some of the team, you've got a few of them online, so I won't go back. Then we've got a bunch of students. So I just wanted to emphasize, when we develop software, so this is a microcosm of the software engineering process. We have people involved all throughout. So people write code and test code. They do designs. We work together, so we don't come up with requirements for software as individuals, but we work with stakeholders of various types to do that. And we have to work in teams. We have to project manage. We use a bunch of tools as developers, and ultimately people use the software. So we're interested in both those perspectives. How to understand and better leverage the diversity of the humans involved in engineering the software, and produce software which is a better fit for the diverse end users of it. So here's just very briefly, because I'm probably preaching to the converted, some of the problems you get when you don't do that. So we get software full of gender bias. So there's lots and lots of examples of that. The one I like using is not actually a software problem, but it's a problem of not taking into account gender seatbelts. So seatbelts are all designed for average size males, and that's because all the crash test dummies are average size males. And obviously it's got a whole bunch of problems for everyone else who's not one of them. You're all aware of a bunch of ethnic biases in software, face recognition software, software used to do prediction, for example, for policing and so on. A lot of software has a cultural bias, so it's engineered by people that come from one cultural perspective and forgets about all others. Most people writing software are highly educated, relatively wealthy, and use a lot of jargon, so often this migrates its way into software as well. We increasingly need to support a diverse range of ages, and yet, again, a lot of software design for either very young or aging people is really not fit for purpose. Many people have physical, mental, cognitive challenges that, again, a lot of our software doesn't take into account, and so on. And so I can go on with lots of other examples. And just to emphasize again, these human aspects can apply to the users, but also stakeholders in general, but to the team members as well. And we're interested in both. So just again, briefly, some of the challenges. Current approaches typically ignore many of these human aspects. We don't even have ways of talking about them, let alone incorporating them into the software development life cycle. In model-driven software engineering, which is one of the areas that I'm an expert in, we capture a variety of requirements, but then we really want to use those throughout the design, implementation, and evaluation of the software, but we don't have appropriate tools and techniques to do that at the moment. And there are no ways of kind of, if you like, reasoning about these things, talking about them, ensuring they're actually properly supported. And again, you can probably all think of examples from your own experience of poor software solutions that result from that. This is kind of my thesis again. I'll claim it is one of them anyway. That using this living lab type approach can help to mitigate that. So it could be used a more co-creational approach that stakeholders are involved as first-class citizens throughout the development. So it's often in software engineering we kind of gather requirements from people. But then we forget about them until we deliver the software. And so the amount of design, implementation, and testing using real people is never sufficient. And we often don't take into account the variety of human aspects that they have, and just some of the ones I've got there. We want to model those things best. You don't want to forget about them or have them modeled in a very informal way or have them to just sit in people's minds, but actually make them explicit rather than tacit information. And we want to reason about completeness. And then we'd like to incorporate that richer information about not just what the software should do, but who it should do it for and the ways it should do it for those people into the production of that. So it's using a inverted quotes model-driven techniques to do that. So some of the projects that we've got going on at the moment, we're trying to come up with a terminology, if you like, I call it a taxonomy, that may or may not be accurate, of how do we talk about these kind of human aspects when we engineer software, and there doesn't exist one at the moment. We want to understand, again, how the human aspects of the software engineers as humans impact. It's been an area of a lot of research, but there's still a lot of gaps. We'd like to understand, who actually is interested in the software engineering. That's the stakeholders. How do we find them better, have a good dialogue with them, and actually get the requirements that they have better than we do now. We want to model those human aspects. We want to add them to designs and implementations. We want to make sure that a whole variety of human aspects are incorporated. Accessibility is one that's been well studied, but still not very richly implemented to date, and lots of examples of software that's got poor accessibility, just as one example. And we're looking at things like how we give users a better feedback loop to the development team. A variety of areas we're work in a variety of health domains, as Jen and Lisa indicated earlier. That's kind of backgrounds that they come from. With some non-government organisations targeting kind of vulnerable members of the community. We've got some other industries as well that we collaborate with. So a variety of domains. I just want to finish with a few questions. So, could this living lab approach, which is not typically used by software engineers, help us address this lack of human aspects in software engineering? How do we identify stakeholders? I'm interested in how people do that in the lab. Someone talked about that this morning in a very interesting way. How can we recruit suitable people to talk to from those stakeholder groups? And how do we keep them engaged? How do we give them value? How do we return value to them? How do we treat them like first-class citizens? And by this I mean, in software engineering, we tend to have them and us. Them as the users, inverted quotes, and us as the software engineers. And how do we break down that kind of thought that we've got this divide between the two groups? And it's quite ingrained in the education and practice of software engineers. Again, we're interested in how living lab sessions themselves might be turned into research outcomes that we can disseminate to the wider community for others to learn from. And one question I asked this morning, what if our co-creators and ourselves want the wrong things? So this is not, just because a user wants something doesn't mean we should give it to them. So it's an interesting kind of self-reflection process of how do we make sure we don't build systems that are actually harmful. Just because we can build it doesn't mean that we should necessarily. So I'm also interested in making sure that we pick up the fishhooks and broken glass that might accumulate through the process and not end up producing harmful software systems out the end.
All right. Do you want me to facilitate these questions?
Please do. Yeah.
So I stop sharing the screen. Thanks a lot, John, for introducing your living lab today, and also posing these really relevant and interesting questions. Is there anyone in the audience who want to jump on some of the questions?
I do, but I want to jump on a question that is related to something.
Yeah, then go ahead, Diego.
So, yeah, I come.
Speaking of the speaker thing.
Yeah. So I come from a software engineering background also, and I've migrated to human-computer interaction because I also saw that there was a lack of human aspects in the ways that I was taught that you had to elicit requirements. So now that I'm in a more HCI perspective, I see that there is this problem of translating ethnography or co-design into the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see that co-design could help you modify that? So that process that is because to software engineers, to students, it's very clear how they have to elicit them. How do you see that co-design can affect that?
Look, really interesting question. I think so. Some of these issues have been in the sort of HCI community, UX community, etc. for a long time, but most software engineers don't practice them, as you just pointed out. And there's a number of reasons. One, they're not educated in that in sufficiently. But secondly, I think there's all the other kinds of things they need to do in their jobs that they sort of want to get onto the designing and building rather than perhaps sometimes the listening and so on. But I think even that misses the point, because I think you need those co-creators involved throughout the process and getting feedback from them and contributing to the creation of the new software systems in our interest area throughout. And so how do you build that kind of collaborative relationship and fit it in, if you like, with sort of traditional software processes? So in agile software development, we've tried to do it by customer and team as the metaphor, but in my experience, most customers are not in the software team, and even if they are, they're often sidelined. So you get the them and us. So even if the process supposedly supports it, the culture doesn't support. And that gets back to that point of software developers are humans, and they're not the same as the people they're building software for typically, and that's extremely rarely the case. So they're trying to build systems sometimes for people they don't have much empathy with or understanding of, and that's again part of the issue. So how do we build in mechanisms that we can, if nothing else, force them? And that's what I was talking about by saying putting into the models that they use these human aspects that have to be taken into account, making sure the creational process includes those stakeholders intimately throughout the process is essential. I also think we have to diversify the workforce, because the workforce is still extremely undiverse that build the software systems, and that's again part of the problem.
I think I can, one comment to this question. I think that might also have to do with the process of software engineering itself. I mean, if the aim is to complete and finalize and test a product kind of in a very narrow sense, then one can understand why software engineering is kind of a bit siloed at the moment. But if you look at Living Labs and really a whole product life cycle and think a bit more about accountability of what we do with our products and what we want to achieve with our products and evaluate the real use of it and impact, I think then automatically we come very quickly to that urge and that understanding that we have to investigate the context and environments where these technologies are used, and really aim for not only usability and performance, but meaningfulness, that the products really achieve what they should achieve, and seeing it really as that helix where evaluation and requirements keep on informing each other and make sure that products are taken up. So that was a comment from my side. Any other ideas, comments to John's questions from the audience? And we are a fairly small group here at the moment. If you just unmute and ask your questions, that will be fine. Julia, please go ahead, and then Gary.
Yes, so I found it very interesting to see how, the Living Lab approach doesn't know industries, like you can apply to basically everywhere. I was thinking, so when you're developing programs with how many users, and I think you probably would have like a wide range of users, with how many users are you testing this, and how do you always access them, or do you switch them up, or how's that working?
Look, it's a good question. So it varies by team to team, the size of the organization, the complexity of the software. So in many kind of startups or small niche software shops, you might have a very small user community, or even none. So we've been doing quite a lot of app analysis where the apps are often built by 1, 2, 3 people, put in the app store, downloaded, used, and some of them, it seems very clear that there's no user testing whatsoever. The testing is you stick it in the app store and see if enough people download it, pay for it, etc. That's, I wouldn't say that's state of the art, but that's one extreme example where you don't bother. You test it in the wild, if you like. But then there's as I mentioned, there's a lack of feedback loops and so on. Then I know organizations. I've got a former PhD who's in a very large software organization, and they have a whole, what they call customer experience team. There's like over 100 people. the software developers never talk to customers, but the customer experience team does, and then the software developers talk to the customer experience team. So you can just imagine the separation. So the software engineers don't fully understand the end user because they don't ever interact with them. The language that's used to turn the stakeholders, end users' requirements and needs and problems, etc., into a form that the software engineers get access to is by an intermediary or set of intermediaries. There's a very unclear feedback loop. If they make changes to the software, how do they even know particular people that flag them and so on are actually having their needs met and so on? So that's a very common approach in the larger software organizations. And that particular company also has a UX team, which is like 30 odd people as well. So the interface design is actually not done by the people who engineer the database, the multi-server architecture, the business logic, and all that kind of stuff. So you've got separation of concerns that are probably, and my ex-PhD suggests as well, quite harmful to producing good solutions for diverse stakeholders.
Yeah, especially when you say that the CX team is helping out, but engineers are actually not really talking to the client, which can be, I guess, quite a problem because you're interpreting something from someone else. But yeah, I think that there's definitely potential for improvement.
Thanks
in that process.
For your comment. Gareth, if you could step up, you had a question as well.
I was just wondering whether, to what extent, the desire to be playing with the latest technology and developing software, the next technology, is also a driver of this.
Yeah, so excellent question. So there's a guy called Philippe Cruchin who's at the University of British Columbia, very famous guy in software engineering. He gave a keynote talk at a conference that I was running about 10 years ago now, and he was recounting some of these problems and from his perspective as a consultant. And he was recounting the story of his son, and his son was telling him, "Oh, look, Dad, I'm working on this new software project, it's kind of this domain. We're going to use Ruby on Rails. It's just some software technology that become popular then. It was new and cool and hyper. So, we want to use these cool new technologies." Now, in my experience, a very large number, and I'm kind of being a bit overgeneralizing, but since I'm talking, I will. A lot of software engineers get into the domain because they enjoy building stuff and they enjoy the design and implementation, the technical side. They want to build things. This has some problems that, they don't have a lot of empathy with the stakeholders and end users. They don't understand them. They often don't understand the kind of things I talked about, the human aspects. They don't appreciate them. They forget about them. Just recounting the story of that large software company where they're separated by one or two steps from the people they're building software for. So is it no surprise, and that's not written down in or codified in any useful way, is it no surprise to us that these people who love building this cool technology focus on that stuff and don't worry about the kind of, we're trying to solve human problems. We don't build software just for the heck of it. We do it to solve human problems and make people's lives better, ultimately. And how do we get that sort of, that connected? I mentioned the diversity of the workforce. Again, I've been concerned with this for a long time. We tend to attract a gross overgeneralization side of the software engineers in the audience, people whose human interface often is not that great, people whose cognitive style is quite different to most of the rest of us, present company accepted, that again, have that sort of focus on building and using cool stuff, dare I say, to the exclusion of actually solving real world problems for real people. And one of, I think, it's not going to be a panacea, but one of the ways to help that is to get a more diverse workforce. So as part of our overall picture here, there's recruiting a more diverse workforce into the engineering of next generation software systems. That, again, one of my theses is that it won't fix, but it will assist in addressing some of those issues.
I wonder how much it can be incorporated into education as well. Now, if you just take AI, there's a very large body of evidence of ingraining existing bias. So books like Invisible.
Yeah, so AI. We are interested in software engineering for AI, or engineering what I call intelligent systems. Again, most of those people come from a maths background. They're not your typical person off the street. Most of them, again, tend to focus on using available data sets which are inherently biased, particularly when you start looking at people aspects, and there's lots and lots of examples of that. And they tend to use self-reinforcing training approaches and so on. So the biases that are already there will be exacerbated and so on. Again, I think there's a workforce issue. There's a codifying some of these issues that are tacit at the moment. So explicitly, have you checked for example, that people are of diverse ethnicities? So that comes with a whole lot of implications. People of diverse genders, people of diverse ages. A number of people have challenges in using computing systems that have to be accounted for. Have you checked all those things? Are your design, implementation, testing, and feedback processes from those people, making sure, you know, you can't solve everything perhaps, but you're at least doing a much better than you do now.
Thanks, John. Any other comments? It's a lot of questions. We could probably spend a whole day on just discussing these bullet points. Any other comment? I'm actually quite intrigued by the last bullet point, and we spoke about that in Victoria a little bit this morning. What if the co-creators don't know what they want or want the wrong things? And I think that's, of course, that's very valid. And I mean, to the first bit, no, people don't know what they want. And if we particularly look at the innovation space and talk about things that don't exist yet, then we can't expect people to tell us how to design or engineer or program something. I think it's a very intensive process where we have to work together and need methods and techniques and activities to really explore the underlying issues and what we actually want to resolve and what we want to achieve. And well, I think if I'm asked, do you know what you want? No, but do I know it when I see it? Yes, probably. So it comes back to prototyping and technology probes and this whole interwoven. We are back to Gareth's fabric, weaving together solutions of understanding each other and what could work. It's not a very linear process, in my opinion. All right, let us thank John for his presentation. And yes, we can give a virtual and a real clap.